I had been stuck in a monotonous cycle of office jobs for years, craving something that connected me to nature. My search took me further than expected until I stumbled upon a job ad for a fire lockout. The hours were grueling, the benefits practically non-existent, and the pay, well, let's just say it wasn't enough to sway anyone. Yet, there was something about the lifestyle it promised, peace, isolation, and the beauty of the natural world, that drew me in. It was supposed to be a temporary break from the chaos of city life. But somehow, I found myself sticking with it, year after year, until the job became my whole life. The years passed, and I accumulated enough stories to keep a party entertained for a week. Stories of things that went beyond the job description. My job wasn't the typical fire watch, and I'm not sure if it's the same for others in the line of work, but let's just say there were extra duties involved. My first day was overwhelming. The ranger, not another lookout, gave me the tour. The previous 2 fire watchers had quit on short notice, leaving me in the position to learn everything the hard way. We walked through the dense forest, the path winding unexpectedly, turning away from the tower at times and making it easy to lose track. But we finally arrived at the fire watch tower around 8:20 p.m. The first rule I was told was to close the door before 8:30 p.m. and never open it again until 6 a.m. The door clicked shut, and the long shift began. At first, nothing happened. My partner, seemingly uninterested in the job, lounged around. I was left alone to explore my temporary home. The tower wasn't much, just 4 rooms, a rustic kitchen with minimal appliances, a bathroom with only the essentials, a small lounge area, and a cluttered storage room filled with equipment I didn't know how to use. All the rooms had glass walls, offering a perfect view of the surrounding wilderness. I tried talking to my partner, but he wasn't receptive. Every question about the job was met with grunts and dismissive gestures. As the night deepened, he checked his watch, took something from the storage, and handed me a pair of binoculars. They looked far more advanced than I had expected. When I turned them on, the clarity was astounding. Even in the pitch-black night, I could see miles ahead. There was some kind of night vision or infrared technology at work, but it didn't matter. I could see everything. I began scanning the horizon for signs of smoke, fire, or movement. Hours passed without incident, and I eventually turned the binoculars toward the tree line near the tower. I froze. At first, it was just a strange movement, something in the trees. I focused in, straining to make out the figure. It looked like a person, but something about the motion wasn't right. The figure was waving, over-enthusiastically, as if desperate for attention. I waited, watching through the lenses. The figure didn't stop. Minutes passed, and it kept waving, unwavering and unnerving. I checked every so often, but there it was, still waving in the direction of the tower. I asked my partner about it, but he didn't care. He just told me to ignore it. And so, I did. But it didn't make the feeling go away. That was my first shift. And it set the tone for everything to come. The eerie, unsettling feeling that lingered. The unnerving sense that something just wasn't right. But I still had months, maybe years, ahead of me in that tower. And I would come to learn that not everything out there in the wilderness could be explained. The kitchen was the most mundane part of the tower, but even it had its secrets. It was simple, as rustic as the rest of the place. A small fridge with only the basics, lettuce sandwiches, salads made from just lettuce and cherry tomatoes, or dry, bland crackers. The best you could do was add a packet of ketchup or a sprinkle of salt. Drinks? Water. Nothing else. If you were hungry, you learned to make do with what you had. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. And those first days, quiet, eerie, isolated, set the stage for what was to come. And the figure in the trees? That was only the beginning. Their hospitality, or lack thereof, became evident quickly. At first, I tried to mask my disappointment, smiling through the awkwardness and making do with what was provided. A lettuce sandwich, some crackers, and water, barely enough to keep hunger at bay, but I kept up the facade, at least for a while. But after a few weeks, the act wore thin. I decided to bring my own food, something more substantial than the tasteless offerings they provided. The shift began like any other. The ranger left with his can of paint, returning a while later with red stains on his clothes. I was left alone to do what I had learned best, watch. But tonight, things felt different. The night air seemed heavier, the tension palpable. I began spotting more figures out in the distance, waving at me from afar. At first, it seemed innocent enough, just people trying to get attention. But as the waves grew more frequent and the figures drew closer, something in me stirred. Their faces were barely visible, but I could see their mouths stretched into wide, unsettling grins. They waved relentlessly, as if their sole purpose in life was to keep my attention. I couldn't take it anymore. I sat down, pulled out my packed meal, and began eating. But before I could take a proper bite, the ranger snatched it out of my hands. He was ravenous, or so it seemed. I shouted at him, trying to grab the food back, but he was too quick. He bolted out onto the balcony and tossed it all off the edge. My roast beef sandwich, gone in an instant. He stormed back inside, furious. "I told you not to bring outside food," he hissed. I hesitated, then told him I hadn't been informed of any such rule. His face flickered through a range of emotions, studying me, questioning whether I was lying, before finally accepting my claim. "Don't do it again," he muttered. Then, in a move that felt almost calculated, he locked all the balcony doors. That was the part of the job I had grown to love, the fresh air, the wide-open view of the wilderness, the tranquility of the night. But now, even that small comfort was denied. The night grew even more unsettling. Soft thuds began to echo from outside. Heavy, almost rhythmic sounds that bounced against the dirt. Occasionally, the thud would be followed by a faint dink, the unmistakable sound of something striking the wooden beams holding up the tower. It was hard to see what was causing the noises. The angle from the windows didn't offer a good view, but with the binoculars, I could make out movement just beneath the tower. Whatever was out there was not just walking, it was throwing things, with unnerving force. The noise was so loud that I knew something large, something powerful, was out there. Yet, whatever it was, I couldn't see it. By the time the shift ended, we dared to peek outside. The ground beneath the tower was littered with crumbs and wrappers, evidence of the food that had been tossed off the edge. Large divots had been punched into the dirt, craters that hadn't been there before. My job now was to fill those holes, to erase the evidence, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking out there. In the morning, on my way toward the tower, I saw them, a group of 4 young hikers. They looked eager, ready to spend the night in the wild. I wasn't trained to handle situations like this, but I felt a moral responsibility to warn them. I called out, trying my best to make them understand, to dissuade them from staying. At first, they seemed to listen, but then one of them, bolder than the rest, asked, "Are you a ranger?" When I admitted I wasn't, their faces changed. Their respect, their caution, vanished. With a hollow promise to stay safe, they turned and walked away, leaving me with a sinking feeling in my gut. Back at the tower, the ranger returned with his can of paint, his right arm dotted with red specks. We went through the motions of the shift, but my mind kept drifting back to the hikers. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were in danger. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "What should we do if we see hikers out there at night?" I asked. He paused, his eyes no longer on his book. There was a strange stillness to him, a momentary shift in his demeanor, as if he were pondering something deep and unsettling. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed and simply asked, "How many?" "4," I replied. Without another word, he returned to his book, and the conversation ended there. That night, everything felt off. The air, the stillness, the feeling that something was just beyond the edge of sight, waiting. It was a warning. A warning I couldn't quite understand, but one I knew I would have to face soon. That shift was, for the most part, uneventful. I spent the hours watching the trees, hoping to spot some nocturnal animals as the sky began to brighten at the horizon. But instead of heading our separate ways after the shift, the ranger motioned for me to follow him. We walked through the common entrance near the parking area, heading toward the tree line. I felt a sudden, tight grip on my shoulder, and then the ranger's other hand covered his eyes. I froze, unsure what to make of this. "What are you doing?" I asked hesitantly. His voice was low, but stern. "Do as I say," he commanded. "We wait here, and you don't move until you see those hikers again." Confused and uncomfortable, I found myself sitting there with him, the tension in the air palpable. He never let go of my shoulder, nor did he remove his hand from his eyes. The grip was firm, almost unyielding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply off. The hours crawled by as we waited, from 6 in the morning until around 9. Every moment felt stretched, as if the world was holding its breath with me. Finally, movement emerged from the tree line. The group of hikers returned, walking with a cheerful air, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. Their smiles were wide, almost unnaturally so, their movements light and carefree. "They're here," I muttered to the ranger, and his grip on my shoulder tightened. He was readying himself for something. I watched as they loaded their gear back into their truck, still in high spirits. "They look fine." "Too fine," I added, feeling a strange sense of unease as I spoke. The ranger didn't respond immediately, only asked me again, "How many are there?" "5, I said, finally breaking the silence. "5, he repeated, as though it was something important, something I hadn't quite understood yet. "I thought you said 4 last night." "No," I replied, puzzled. "I said 5. They seemed perfectly fine. They were all smiles, really." A sigh escaped him, and with a terse nod, he asked me to read off their license plate. He called into his radio, relaying the information, adding in a code I didn't understand. "Code 147, he muttered. It wasn't until later that I realized what had happened. The ranger had insisted I told him there were 4 hikers, not 5. But when I replayed the events in my head, I knew I had said 5. The feeling of something being off grew stronger. Had I been mistaken? Or had someone, been manipulating what I thought I remembered? Now, let me tell you about the ranger, though that wasn't his name. I never learned his name, and I came to realize that it was probably for the best. It didn't take long for me to settle into the routine of the job. In fact, I became a bit of a savant at it. The work was simple, mostly just watch the trees, scan for any signs of trouble, and keep an eye out for fires or any unusual activity. The shifts started blending together. The ranger went about his business with his red paint, and I set up my own schedule. In between my watches, I would take short breaks to read, check my phone, or even dabble in dating apps. It made the long hours bearable, knowing I had something to look forward to after each shift. But one night, during one of my many long stretches of staring at the tree line, something broke my concentration. I heard a voice, polite, calm, almost pleasant, coming from somewhere just outside the tower. It wasn't the usual crunch of leaves or the rustling of branches. No, this was deliberate. "Hello?" I blinked, startled, my heart racing. I hadn't heard anyone approach. I looked toward the ground just beneath the tower's faint light, and there, standing in the shadows, was a person. His features were mostly obscured, but his posture seemed calm, almost serene. "Hello," he repeated, his voice warmer than anything I had heard in the wilderness. I was so stunned I didn't respond right away, which only encouraged him to speak again, drawing out the greeting. "Hello." Snapping back to reality, I finally answered, my voice unsure but trying to be polite. Hello?" The man explained that he had gotten lost while hiking and was trying to find his way back to his car. "Could you come down here and help me?" he asked, his tone so pleasant, so completely devoid of any malice. There was something about his smile, something unsettling in the way he spoke, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He even offered to show me some nice scenic spots around the area. It was tempting. This was exactly what I had been hoping to do, to explore the land more, to feel connected to the beauty of the wilderness. But then I remembered the rule, the one the ranger had emphasized more than once: never open the door. Was that rule meant to keep me from leaving the tower? Or was there something more sinister behind it? Under normal circumstances, I would have gone down without hesitation. I had always prided myself on taking initiative. But with everything I had seen so far, I found myself second-guessing everything. My body mirrored my confusion, leaning toward the stairwell, then pulling back, uncertain. After a few moments of internal tug-of-war, the ranger noticed. I froze. There, just next to the kettle, was something that shouldn't have been there. A small note, folded neatly, placed in a way that seemed deliberate, like it had been waiting for me. My first instinct was to reach for it, but something inside me hesitated. The note was plain, no markings or signs of a sender. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, trying to shake off the creeping sensation that something was terribly off. I glanced over at the ranger, who was sitting in his usual chair, his gaze far away, lost in thought. It was one of those moments when the silence felt too heavy, too suffocating. The air seemed thick with expectation, as if the very walls of the station were watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong choice. Against my better judgment, I picked up the note and unfolded it. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, and smelled faintly of the outdoors. I read the simple words written on it. "Don't go outside tonight." My heart skipped a beat. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I stared at the words. It wasn't a warning I had expected, not from anyone who knew what this place was like. I wanted to tear the note up, throw it away, dismiss it as some cruel prank. But something in my gut told me not to. Instead, I folded it carefully back and placed it down on the counter, my mind racing with questions. Who left it? Was it from the ranger? Or something else? The sense of foreboding gnawed at me as I turned to face the ranger. He hadn't moved. He hadn't reacted. He seemed completely unaware of the note, as if he were lost in his own thoughts. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness outside was closing in, pressing against the windows, as if waiting for me to make a mistake. The hours stretched on, but my mind refused to settle. I was hyper-aware of every sound, every shift in the air, and I couldn't stop the thought from circling in my mind. What would happen if I went outside? Would I be like the others? Would I be pulled into whatever strange force had claimed the ones before me? I tried to focus on the task at hand, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The shadows outside seemed darker than usual, like they were hiding something, or maybe something was hiding in them. And then, as if to answer my thoughts, the lights flickered. I turned to look at the pendulum bulb, but it was still glowing. The air felt oppressive again, heavier than before. I should have known then that I wasn't alone. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The fire was getting closer. I could see the smoke now, swirling up into the sky, a dark column that seemed to grow with each passing second. The heat was palpable, even from this distance. Yet the ranger was still so calm, flipping through the pages of his book as if nothing had changed. I took a deep breath and tried again. "Ranger, we need to," I started, my voice tinged with panic. He cut me off with a simple gesture, not looking up from his page. "No need to worry about it. It's controlled." Controlled? That fire was not controlled. It was spreading fast, crawling through the underbrush and threatening to engulf everything in its path. I could almost hear the crackle of flames, feel the intensity of the blaze in my bones. My legs were still weak from the earlier injury, but panic fueled me to stand and move toward the window. I needed to see it for myself. There was no way I was going to sit here while that fire got closer. The ranger didn't try to stop me. He just sat there, his face impassive, as I opened the window and peered outside. The fire was real, its light dancing off the tree line, and it was growing faster than I'd ever seen a fire move. I turned back to the ranger. "We need to alert someone. We have to call this in." He sighed, slowly setting the book down and finally meeting my gaze. "It's already been dealt with." "Dealt with?" My voice rose in disbelief. "That fire is going to consume everything if we don't do something." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, walked over to the table, and picked up a small radio. He pressed a button, his voice low and calm as he spoke into it. "Code 147, he said. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. "Code 147? I asked, almost whispering, not sure if I even wanted to know the answer. He turned back toward me, his expression unreadable. "You'll learn soon enough." The radio crackled with static before a voice on the other end responded. "Understood. Proceed as planned." The fire was now much closer, the flames licking at the trees, crackling and roaring. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked out the window again. I knew something was terribly wrong, but the ranger seemed so certain, so calm, as if he had seen this before, maybe even orchestrated it. I felt a cold dread settle in my gut. "What are we supposed to do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Wait," he said simply. "It'll pass." I couldn't understand. The fire was right there, but he wasn't worried. He wasn't even fazed. The confusion and fear surged through me, but I stayed silent, staring at the growing inferno as it illuminated the night. It felt like everything was going to burn, and yet the ranger was unconcerned. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the fire outside seemed to grow even brighter, casting strange shadows on the walls of the tower. I turned back to look at the ranger, but he had already returned to his book, as if nothing was happening. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The fire. The doll. The strange rules, the constant tension in the air. This wasn't just a fire watch. It was something far darker, far more unsettling. And I was trapped in the middle of it. Fear because the light remained focused on them, unmoving and inhuman. It wasn't just an eye, it was a presence, an unimaginable thing that hovered above the trees, beyond the canopy. The eye glistened, its surface shimmering with an unnatural light that bent the very air around it. The camper, caught in its gaze, didn't move an inch. I couldn't hear them scream or cry out. The night swallowed all sounds, leaving only the oppressive weight of the eye's gaze. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the sight. My heart pounded, my breath shallow as I watched the camper stand paralyzed in the spotlight, illuminated as if under an interrogation light. But I knew the truth, this wasn't a simple spotlight. This was something far more sinister, something that had been here long before any of us ever set foot on this land. The eye seemed to grow larger, as if the sky itself was bending to accommodate it. The camper's body began to twitch, their limbs jerking slightly as if they were slowly coming back to life. But it wasn't in the usual sense. There was something wrong, something alien, about the way they moved. The air around them crackled with a tense, electric energy. I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear myself away from the scene unfolding before me. My mind raced, wondering what to do, what this meant. I'd seen so many strange things in my time here, but nothing like this. Not the way the light seemed to distort the air itself. Not the way the woods around me had gone eerily silent, the creatures that had once filled the night with their eerie sounds now gone. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light began to flicker. The eye, too, seemed to shudder, its gaze shifting for a split second, just long enough for the camper to break free. But they didn't run. Instead, they dropped to their knees, hands clutching their head as if in agony, as if something was forcing its way inside them. The movements became erratic, unnatural, their body bending at strange angles, not quite human anymore. The whole scene was like a nightmare, something that couldn't possibly be real. Yet, there I was, watching it unfold before me, helpless. I couldn't look away, even though every part of me screamed to do so. And then, just as abruptly as it had all started, the light vanished, the eye no longer looming over the camper. In the silence that followed, I could hear the soft rustling of leaves as the camper slumped forward, their form now still. But they weren't the same. Their features were different, twisted, unnatural, and they began to rise again, slowly, with jerking movements, as though they were being pulled to their feet by some unseen force. I had to get out of there. The ranger's warnings echoed in my mind, never engage, never go out into the dark when things get strange, but it was too late for that. The danger was already here, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do now. What had I just witnessed? What had that thing in the sky been? I backed away slowly, my breath caught in my throat, the fear creeping back into my bones. But there was no turning back now. Whatever had started in the woods wasn't going to stop. And I feared that I was already too far in. The eerie stillness of the night settled over me again, but my mind was racing with the strange and horrific things I'd just witnessed. Each event seemed to build upon the last, pushing the boundaries of what was possible, what was real. The camper, now nothing more than a fleeting speck whisked away by the eye, no, the mouth, was just one of the many things I would carry with me, an unshakable memory. I sat there, in the familiar dim light of the watchtower, trying to return to the mundane. My hands shook slightly as I reached for my book, attempting to find some semblance of normalcy. But the truth lingered, a constant hum beneath the surface. No matter how many times I tried to push it away, the strange phenomena would come for me, one after another. Some I'd survived, others, not so much. The stars above had been covered, hidden behind something that looked like a vast, titanic creature, like a jellyfish in the sky, its presence both beautiful and utterly terrifying. The camper had been nothing more than prey to whatever it was. I had no idea what I'd seen, but I knew one thing for certain, the world I once understood was no longer the same. And now, as I sat here, with the glow of my lantern flickering dimly, I wondered how much longer I could keep doing this job. How long before whatever strange force was at work here would finally catch up to me? As the night dragged on and the wind began to pick up outside, I turned the pages of my book, my eyes scanning the words but not really reading them. My thoughts kept drifting back to the eyes, the mouths, the creatures. I knew my partner, the ranger, had seen things too, but perhaps not all of them. Maybe he'd been here longer, maybe he had more answers. But part of me didn't want to know more. Some things were better left unexplored. But as I continued to sit in the tower, watching the night unfold outside, I knew one thing, I was here to stay. Maybe not forever. But for now, I would continue to survive. I would keep doing my job, no matter how strange it became. Because in this place, the only thing that seemed to matter was making it through the night. And that was a lesson I had learned the hard way.